Hi, Yizhao Martins, licensed marriage and family therapist, couples therapist. We are on week 3 on our topic of defining styles for couples. So today we're focusing on the attorney and the judge. So we're still going to go over the 4 criterions, and I want to add a case study at the end. So first, let's take a look at the attachment style. In this couple, the lawyer or the attorney tend to have the attachment style of avoidant attachment, which means they're so used to be hyper, super independent and only rely on themselves. They have such a hard time relying on other people to meet their needs. That is something we learned early on. I'm the only one that I can depend on. I'm the only one that can get things done in the way I want it. I cannot trust other people to meet my needs. Certainly not the very vulnerable, very core needs. So for the partner who is more like the judge, they tend to have anxious-preoccupied attachment style. So they have this innate need for other people to regulate, manage their arousals so they feel okay. Okay, so and then we are gonna take a look at the arousal level. Since we're talking about arousals, this kind of couple tend to use what we call the cortical control. What does that mean? So they tend to bypass emotions and all bodily sensations, and instead they always go to their head, go to the intellectual part, and they use that highly controlled intellect to suppress any bodily arousals and sensations. We probably all know this. When we feel angry, we feel sad, we feel hurt, disgusted, we feel something in our body that tells us this is sadness, this is anger, this is frustration, this is hurt. They feel differently in the body in some way. Some people tend to come up with an image in their head, say when they're upset or when they're sad. The person or the image in their head is different based on different emotions. That works. So whatever your body is telling you, this emotion is different from that emotion, is a great indicator and data that we gather all the time to tell us what's happening. Well, it comes with certain arousal and sensations. For certain people, it's very hard to tolerate the sensations. May that be a heaviness in the heart or rising up energy and heat in the head, in the body. So they tend to use certain things to manage the arousals. They stay focused on the thoughts, my opinions, instead of going down to the sensations and emotions deeper inside, which is also another source of knowledge and data for us. So their defenses for this couple is very much intellectualization, you're right, and pointing finger at other people, like blaming, criticizing, fixing. And also another one is called being right. I'm always right. And to be okay, I need to be right. Right? So for those couples, they have various parts that developed growing up, an aspect of their psyche that developed over time when they are young, which was very adaptable for their survival, but no longer is adaptable now they're older and in intimate relationships. So one of them is for the judge, is called outer critic. Well, if you think about it, the nature, the job, the role of a judge is to determine who is right and who is wrong. And there's always some bad person to blame and with consequences, and they give the orders, right? That's their job. But in a relationship, if you continue to let this outer critic of you take over your system, always come from a place of you're not doing right, you're wrong, you're right, this is wrong. And then that creates problems. So the second part that's developed that's problematic is the intellectual part or the brainy part that has a hard time going to the feelings and sensations, always escape into the head, into the thoughts and opinions. The third one is a very young one, an insecure one that tend to show up in the attorney or lawyer partner that is called I'm not good enough. Is the low self-esteem one that criticizes self, I'm not being good enough, whenever they feel like they're losing the argument in the relationship. The last one is it can go for both partners. Sometimes they have a dissociative part that can show up as intellectualization and dissociating from the sensations of bodies, or just this blankness in the eyes, like checking out. They're not being present anymore. They are shutting down. Okay. So the couples dynamic, you probably can tell, it's very much intellectual discourse. It feels like being in the courthouse or being at a seminar. You always talk about the right and right or wrong, and what things are supposed to be, instead of what's really happening inside each of them and in their relationship. So a lot of couple come in this relationship, they tend to be very intellectual and educated, or they have this sexual orientation or tendency to be sapiosexual, which means they get turned on by intellectual conversations. So they attract each other that way. And at the beginning, anything that's slightly different can be a source of excitement and create this attraction. But over time, if they do not deal with their own internal differentiation and authority issues, that can make them get into a roadblock and get stuck in the relationship. So let me give you a real-time example. Let's look at Pavlo and Christina. They're very attracted to each other at the beginning. Christina thinks Pavlo is the smartest man she's ever met. And then they met at a seminar where Pavlo was giving this presentation. That just really took Christina's breath away. So the first couple months of a honeymoon were just blissful. They talk about everything from religion to politics to culture to food to books they read to movies they watch. And they were fascinated with each other. They will stay in bed and talking for hours and hours, and then also come with the sex and intimacy and sexually, and then they talk more. That's the first stage. And the second stage is when both of them start to feel comfortable with each other. And Christina noticed that Pavlo tend to want to be right all the time, that he seems to always have something to cite to back up his argument, that he have this like sneer look on him sometimes when he doesn't agree with Christina's opinion. And Christina also noticed that he doesn't listen to her and doesn't really reflect and validate her feelings and her values. So it seems like she called him self-centered or selfish, but it's just that he's very opinionated and he has a hard time connecting from the emotional level. And so she started to criticize him, but she couldn't put her fingers on what's going on. So she will pick on whatever he says sometime and make jokes about it and say, well, yeah, sure, you think you know everything. You're Mr. Know-it-all, right? So that sarcasm really hurt Pavlo. So Pavlo felt like he's being judged. Right? So he started to defend himself even more, getting upset, or he sometimes just shut down and say, well, it's no fun to talk to you about. Let's not talk about it. Right? So they do not really resolve any conflicts between the two of them, and they cannot connect emotionally. So they connect intellectually, but they cannot connect emotionally. So the third stage of their relationship is getting really escalated when Pavlo started to feel more and more hurt by Christina. He's like, well, she used to adore me unconditionally, and I don't know what happened, and she started to dislike me. So whenever Christina doesn't agree with him, his opinions, and it started to share hers, that Pavlo thinks that Christina doesn't love him, doesn't adore him anymore. And Christina doesn't get the emotional connection and validation from Pavlo when he withdraws or shut down or getting defensive. Christina feel even more alone, isolated, and so she thinks that Pavlo doesn't love her anymore, and so they both feel very, very lonely in this relationship and cannot connect somehow. And so, but the only way they know how to connect each other is through the intellect. So they keep getting to argument about intellectual conversation, concepts, and solutions. And then you can see that it still doesn't give them emotional connection. So they feel further apart, even more hurt. That's where they're at. And that is the typical, the attorney and the judge couple. And they tend to feed on each other's arousal, anger, frustration, and heated discussion. And that's the only way they know how to connect. And they cannot go down to their emotions to connect tenderly and in their heart. So much for this week's couple. I hope that it's helpful for you to see. Does it ring a bell to you? Does it sound like your relationship or someone you know their relationship, right? So far for this week. Thank you. We'll continue with this conversation next week, my friends. Bye.